Welcome. I'm Stephen Garvey with National Citizens Alliance, and I'd like to introduce Philip Hutchings. He's
Hello,
a
everyone.
NCA executive member. We're going to be discussing censorship. We believe there's rampant systemic censorship in Canada, not only Canada, the US, Western countries, and non-Western. You can go global on this, Philip. But we're going to dive right into why this is going on. We're going to go to the Constitution. We're going to look at relevant legislation. We're going to look at the fake media in this country and the impact. And we're going to say bluntly, right at the beginning, this systemic censorship has nothing to do with a free and democratic society. Has everything to do with a plutocracy, a tyranny. But that's the reality. There's an elitist, uh, uh, globalist group that's running this country, Philip, without question. Um, Everything you know on the surface is not reality. So NCA likes to operate on reality, and today's going to be all about that. We have to know what's going on in order to deal with it. And NCA is we are totally against censorship, Philip. Obviously, if someone's breaking the law, a reasonable law, whether it's obviously child trafficking online, stuff like that. If they're involved in arms trade illegally, that type of stuff, Philip, there's going to be censorship, right? Reasonable censorship that every decent Canadian would accept. But there, I'll give you an example. NCA in 2019 federal election, we had all kinds of momentum going into that federal election. Guess what? The first week, the first 10 days of that election, we were banned by Facebook. So they basically took a lot of our momentum away. We've been on shadow ban since October of last year, Philip,
Yes.
on Facebook. We've been censored on and off on YouTube. Maybe we got a shadow ban there, but this is just one example of what's going on. We need to fight this. But
Yes. No.
the first step is awareness. So let's look at the charter here. And I just find it so ironic, this charter. You know, it talks about rights and freedoms, Phillips, and it
Yes.
lauds freedom of conscience, freedom of thought, belief.
Hmm.
There's nothing in there, freedom from censorship,
Exactly. Well,
right? So
at
you
the
so you
time,
you
it
you have the freedom to censor whoever you want. So
so
the government.
right
Go ahead.
there though, it does describe the freedom of thought and belief and opinion and expression, which really, to me, would say that you are able to say, as much as some other people may not like it, whatever you like.
You could say it,
And,
but you can be
and
censored.
yes, true, true. Yes,
See, that's what they're doing. So you got free speech, but we have the freedom to censor you, so you don't reach anyone,
true.
right?
Yes, the proverbial fig leaf. Yeah.
Right? You see that it's in there. It's right in the charter. There's nothing. It's just like privacy. There's nothing in here on the right to privacy. There's nothing in here on the right um, to express your opinion without censorship,
Hmm.
right?
Yes. Yes.
So what good is this charter? It's a joke. It's created by this cabal establishment for the cabal establishment,
Very well
right?
written.
Right.
Yes, to be specifically full of
So
cheese
this is
holes. Yeah.
the reason I'm bringing this up. This helps people understand. This is the constitutional basis right now for the country, and you have no recourse against censorship.
Hmm.
You have no right to not be censored. It is not part of one of your fundamental rights. It's not considered a fundamental freedom, though it's fundamental to freedoms,
Hmm.
right? In a bigger community sense,
Yes.
right? So let's shift now. We're going to look now at the Election Act we have to go through some of this legislation. So here's the Elections Act right here, Philip.
Okay.
There's a table of contents
Mm-hmm.
right here. But there's nothing in the Elections Act that prevents private companies from censoring you during an election, like social media companies, like what happened to NCA in 2019.
Yes.
There's nothing.
Yeah, it's interesting because they're supranational. So really, whose jurisdiction would prevail over some of these companies? I think that's some of the great power that they have over people and nations is that they don't specifically reside in any one place either, and that's another problem. Is how do you prevent them from censoring you?
There's nothing in here on the media on getting fair coverage.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing in there. So that's a form of censorship when they're not covering you, right? In direct
Yes.
form. And remember, it's the multi-controlled establishment that wrote this legislation, right?
Yes.
These so-called liberals and conservatives have wrote this and amended this legislation.
Mm-hmm.
They actually did the charter as well. But there's nothing in here to protect a registered party from censorship during the election, even outside the election.
Mm-hmm.
How is that consistent with a free and democratic society?
It is not. I think
We
you've
need
got a
to
very good
ask
point
these
there, Stephen.
questions. These are the tyrants that are running this country. It's all a facade, what's going on. I would argue there's Orwellian layers to it, right? The Charter of Rights and Freedom. It's kind of like a doublespeak when you break it down, right? There's no privacy. There's no way to avoid censorship, right? On and on.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. It's a very good
Yeah,
opinion and thought
I
about it.
want to dive a little deeper. There's a few other legislation, but then we got to look at the media. I'm going to put up the comments here too, so we can get a look at them. Look at that. There's so many the great people about NCA, Philip, that
Yes.
they're really aware, and
Wide awake.
but we're learning from them. They're learning from us, and it's becoming a powerful community, right?
Exactly.
So
There has to be there's many of us who are aware of, to an extent, what is going on, and things are just not correct. And there is a basic and premise of how we thought our country was operated, how we believed we were living. And really, I think the last few years or the last 2 years, Stephen, have really shown that the house of cards is just teetering. And,
yeah, teetering.
Yes.
So we just we just got to double down, right? And
Mm-hmm.
but here I just want to show you, this is the Telecommunications Act. So this is governing these telecommunication companies that are providing internet, Philip,
Yes.
and that type of stuff. But I thought it was pretty interesting in here. If we go to content, it talks here, except where this is unbelievable. Number 36 in this legislation, quote, and remember, it's these so-called liberals and conservatives, right? These puppet liberals and conservatives wrote this legislation and approved it. Quote, and this is section 36, quote, except where the commission approves otherwise. So there's a loophole there, Philip.
Yes.
A Canadian carrier, it could be TELUS, Rogers, Bell, whatever,
Yes.
shall not control the content or influence the meaning or purpose of telecommunications carried by it for the public.
Unless the commission thinks it's okay.
Yeah, so
Yes.
there you go. They have a loophole to control the public content.
Yes. So
Can you believe it?
I can, and it's the same as when you sign up for
Right
anything
there.
online. You'll open it; it'll say, "Do you approve this? 3,700 page document as your contract to approve the service to use a messenger program or something, and somewhere in line 750 will be accept that where the commission of the approval otherwise, and it's a great way to hide an escape clause in a large document. And I think you've done a good job finding that, Stephen. That's great.
Yeah, well, it's there.
Yeah.
These people aren't that bright in Ottawa, right? And I'm pretty well educated like yourself. I can see right through them what they're. This is a soft journey we're living in that's getting worse. Let's face
Yes.
it. It has all the structures to a journey.
Oh, absolutely.
The fake media, these puppet parties, front parties, on and on. Right? It's a whole system there, right?
Absolutely.
And then they pretend there's freedom and democracy, and anyone who threatens them, they push down, they pound down. So how are they different from like some of these horrific, countries in the past, except for slaughtering millions, right?
Yes. Well, like anything, media, the basically your rich national elites and our politicians, they all have risen together. So there's you can look in our Senate and the percentage of senators that have come out of the media into their position as opposed to other positions of experience and recognition. They've literally followed the coattails up of a politician, and they're then rewarded after 10 or 15 years of good service in the news.
Of course, yeah, because they're working for them.
Yes.
So because they've been so great and pushing their line and not being an independent journalist working for the people, they're rewarded with a seat in the Senate.
Yes, which is amazing.
Right? So
Yeah.
this is the cabal of the establishment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So NCA is about the people. We can't be about a tyrannical organization that's doing whatever they want and manipulating people and they're destroying our finances, by the way. The debt's out of control through the central bank, and that's a whole nother topic, but we're going to have to revisit that, Philip. But here's the Broadcast Act, and the Broadcast Act governs what's on TV, right? So this is a form of censorship. I believe it's a barrier to entry for people who want to broadcast, Philip, because everything has to be in French and English, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then there's content, certain content, they has to safeguard and strengthen the cultural, political, social, economic fabric of Canada. That's so vague. What is that? So that's how they're going to judge them. So that's controlling content there. What if NCA was on there and we have a different political view? They would probably take our license away, Philip.
Interesting.
Right?
Yes.
You see that,
interpretation. Yes. Yeah.
Encourage development of Canadian by providing a wide range of program that reflects Canadian opinions, artistic, creative, So they're restricting content here, right? And then they have this they're talking about equal right, linguistic duality, multicultural, multiracial nature of Canada. You have to promote that, right? So these are all barriers to entry for anyone who wants to broadcast.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying programming has to be of high standard. You see that? Oh,
yes.
We're going to take your license away because it's not at the standard we think it should be. Yes,
measured by whom? Yeah.
They have a responsibility for the programs they broadcast. So this is top down governance right here.
Mm-hmm.
They're controlling the content.
Oh, yes,
you see it right here.
The CRTC is the
greatest right there,
control of information ever. Yeah. Yes.
Providing balanced information, light entertainment. They're basically controlling all the content. It has to be drawn from local, regional, national, international sources, educational community to provide reasonable opportunity for the public to be exposed to the expression of different points of view. Yeah. Well, that's good
Yeah.
there, but it's constrained by everything else.
Yes. It's the opinions that they choose to allow
Yeah.
you to have. And
So
I, I think though, Stephen, part of this also has to do with the internet has led to really another cultural revolution in the last basically 25 years that has allowed an expansive level of knowledge, communications all over the world. So there has been more information sharing and really an epiphany in people's knowledge of how governments operate and how some of the dealings are not correct. And I think what we're seeing is really a way to try to recapture that control from a group that really is kind of unsure how to do it without being authoritarian monsters. When we were in the 80s and 90s, I was again, I was in school, I was a high schooler, and early 2000, I was 20 years old. But at that time, I remember you would talk at the proverbial water cooler, and you would talk about that news story that you saw last night, and oh gosh, those darn Maple Leafs, and those things aren't the consistent norm anymore. We're not asleep with the spoon-fed stories that we've heard on the news, because people aren't watching it anymore. They're sick of it. They've realized and they've seen through it.
yeah,
And
but there's lots of pitfalls. There's fake alternative media, right?
oh
So here,
yes,
yeah, the
yeah,
reason I brought up the Broadcast Act because it's a form of barrier to entry. You could see the control on content. So there is a form of censorship in the Broadcast Act. Well, through Bill C-10, which we already did something on, they want to apply this to online broadcast now, Philip. So those same restrictions will be played uh, um, pertaining to online content.
yes, which means you'll have to submit approval
Yes.
before you broadcast.
So they want to control the online broadcasters. We don't know how far that's going to go. Are these going to be certain size companies, or are they going to go after YouTubers and people like that to conform? Right,
Yes, the
right.
first.
So here it is there, but that's all Bill C10 is. I'm not going to go through the same thing, but it's right here. It's applying at online undertakings, right? The transmission, retrial programs over the internet as a distinct class of broadcasting and undertakings.
Hmm.
So they're going to apply the same restrictions to that. And then, but I'm going to shift to this is something we need to be talking about a lot. We need to be talking a lot about CSIS and what they're doing. They're a shadowy, dark group that's very disruptive. They're working for this cabal establishment, and they have the right to disrupt any Canadian, including censorship, disrupt them, and even harm them physically without any due recourse. Philip, it's
CSIS is
unbelievable.
most of Canadians, I would say, if you polled them, I'm going to
I'm going
arbitrarily
to
pick
put
a
up the
number, but I'd
document
say
here.
30% may even know they exist.
Well,
I
this is
mean,
from the Government of Canada website. I'm not going to go into it again. We talked about this, but they have it says they're at the forefront of Canada's national security.
yeah. I mean, it's come out that there's been operations done. I believe it was in New Brunswick in the last few years where they were reporting in the news wolves and wolf
Yes,
attacks. And
yes,
that was actually found to be a covert operations between CSIS and the Canadian military that tried to essentially just see what kind of response they would get from the people. That's wild.
yes.
I mean, what else have they reported that has been untrue? I can think of one, and again, it's anecdotal, but when they brought that new Stephen King's movie, The Clown, there were all the news stories about clowns attacking people in the parks. They think those are also artificial stories, but that's a side note. But
But the bottom line, if you look into CSIS, the document, they have,
Yeah.
it's all etched in national security, threats to the government, right? So if you're a political entity that wants to replace that government, maybe you're viewed as a threat. And they could disrupt anyone. So where's the accountability, the public accountability of them? We're not seeing it. It's all behind the scenes. But they are
Yeah.
operating in the shadows. They operate internationally and domestically. And they have the legislative right to disrupt any Canadian in any means they see fit.
Oh yes, and the information gatherings.
But that's a fact.
They're full about it. I remember last fall being down in Toronto, one of the protests there before going on a march through the city. There were black vans with camera stands out of the back that were basically panning through the crowd. And I'm sure there were facial recognition cameras or scanners that were getting images of everyone who was there. And they drove around when there was the whole group walking through the streets, and they basically just drove through every crowd in order to get images of everyone.
Yeah.
And I mean, they have a history then, and they'd be able to go and search your social files or whatever records they could of you, and you would have a file somewhere.
Yes.
And it's spooky.
I just want to bring that up. I'm not going to go into it. We asked people to take a look at our what were we looking at then when we went into CSIS? We were looking at do you remember that one, Philip? We were looking at CSIS. Oh, that was looking at surveillance. We did a thing on surveillance last week looking at them, but it's good to keep them in mind. We want to hold them in check, right? But we're going to get to the comments, but in terms of the media, Philip made up a good point I think people need to be aware of, is that they're very selective in what content they put on. So there's a lot of content that they're actually not putting up because that's not part of their agenda. So you could argue that's a form of censorship. And Philip shared a good video, and we're going to put it up here and play it to you. But you would never hear this in the fake mainstream media.
Yeah, do you want to share that
I'm
one?
going to play the video.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm gonna play this video now.
So this is one of the protests in France. President Macron essentially announced that all citizens must be vaccinated or will be required to have tests at their own costs every 4 to 5 days in order to essentially transit around the country of France, in order to be able to draw pay, in order to use any services. In addition, there's large pension reforms that previously spiked large protests several years ago that they've rammed through again. And this is the result. This is of the presidential, I don't know if it's palace or housing in France. And these are some pig farmers who chose to use their equipment to protest. Imagine if this happened in Canada.
Yeah. Wow.
That is the window that Charles de Gaulle. I'll tell you after.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I could tell you, Stephen, and for everyone else's record, you could look up historical videos. That window that was having.
Hold on a second.
Okay.
Go ahead.
that window that they were just pouring feces through was the same window that Charles de Gaulle stood from, announcing at the end of the Second World War that Germany had been defeated. That is the same window that was used in multiple French occasions for over 2 centuries to declare large occasions, events, and edicts from the French president. That's what
Interesting.
they're pouring that feces through.
And
It's much more symbolic. Yeah.
according to you, there was no coverage in the mainstream media.
Very few. If members and those who are watching, if this is the first time you're seeing this video, I think it speaks for itself. All of us know full well about the June 6th events in the United States. All of us know full well about, there's been accusations of white supremacy and attacks on different people in Canada. But you don't hear about actual protests against governments and their ideas.
Well, they wouldn't want to show that. They don't want to show the people standing up, right? So
Exactly.
this is another form of censorship, but people are going to have to be very careful with their information, Philip.
Yes.
And if you believe the mainstream media, you're probably going to be living in fear and ignorance, right? Both.
Well, it's awful that if you think about it, your nation is contributing to your own terror. That's really, they're supposed to provide for your security. They're supposed to feel comfortable. That's the opposite of what a proper nation stands for.
So I just want to emphasize the good news today is that we can deal with this legislation, Philip. But
Absolutely.
we have to be in a position of power. They don't want us in a position of power to deal with all this nonsense in this legislation. And we can deal with the Constitution. It needs major overhaul, right? It was written by the cabal establishment for the cabal establishment. It's not written for the people. It wasn't voted on by the people, right?
Any of our members that could get into office, we should be actively working in collaboration with other members, regardless of party. And I think we can all agree that we would work as independents in that idea to try to remove these clauses that allow for exceptions of the rules, that allow governments to walk over you and essentially ignore any of the rights and privileges that the rest of the document basically pretends that you have. If it's written, it should exist.
Yeah, so this is just another layer to what's going on, censorship.
Yeah.
It's there, it's real. Many of us are experiencing it. But one thing we want to do too is about the public domain online. These private companies, we view that as like a town center, Philip.
Yes.
Where people should have the right to free speech within the bounds of reasonable laws, right? So, so that would take the power away from these social media giants to censor, right? They should be governed to our Constitution, our own laws. They shouldn't be creating their own laws within our country, like their community standards.
Yes.
So that's something we could easily legislate. And if Facebook and YouTube don't like it, we'll get the hell out of the country. We don't want you here, right? So China, that's one thing we respect about China. At least they're doing stuff like that. Like but that's something we could be doing too to rein in these social media giants, right? What they're up to, Philip.
Yeah. I mean, it's a balance, and the thing about these social media giants is they are so large, and there's the market that used to be large has shrunk down to kind of a main 3 or 4 players that seem to have the large market share, at least in North America. Twitter, Facebook, etc. They have just more power, and that's the thing. It's the market square. It would be that imagine if, say, you had to get just like at a pool, maybe you had to go at a certain time of day, and you could only have maybe 15 minutes to speak because we're a new party. Where if they say a larger party, they maybe get an hour. Those sorts of things could exist. That's how it exists currently in the social media realm. And I think that's something that, as small time people, we either have to overcome and create our own source, or accept that we need to go to the other sources. And that even if they are lower budget, not quite as snazzy, if you want to use those terms, or literally that we're walking to a park to hear people speak, we may have to get to that old method of politics again. And
Yeah.
I think it would be healthier for everybody. You get out and socialize again. It'd be good for us.
Yeah. So yeah, we just wanted to bring this up. I think we laid it out pretty clear. It's important, like I said, to go start with the Constitution and work your way through. Um, but it's a real issue, and it's probably going to get worse before it's better,
Mm-hmm.
Philip.
Oh, for sure.
Um, the sad reality I have to emphasize is that this is all fixable if there was sufficient political will, but there isn't. Right? Those puppet establishment parties couldn't give a damn. They're not being censored. They don't give a damn about other people being censored, right?
What's
Otherwise, they'd be updating the legislation and being a strong advocate for that. But they
no,
don't care. So
no,
that's the reality. That's what we're dealing with. But
yes,
this is another challenge we're facing, not only here in Canada, it's throughout the world. Censorship. This is systemic censorship without question. In Canada, starts with the Constitution. It runs through the legislation. It's in the media. It's in the social media giants,
hmm,
and it's impacting us throughout our lives. And it's occurring during elections, during the campaign period.
yes, heavily.
So this is not a free and democratic society.
No,
So this should make people outraged, and we're going to have to take the reins over this country, or it's only going to get worse. It's in a top down trajectory right now, Philip.
yes, we're in big trouble. We really are,
Big
and
trouble.
it's one that I think anyone who gets into government, if they're going to be responsible, I don't know if it would be quite popular in the near term, because there would have to be so much uh, management and reforms in how basically budgets are allocated in the near term that, oh gosh,
Yeah, it's a
it
real
is,
mess. It's a real
yeah,
mess. But this
yeah,
is decades and decades of the same entities, right? That have been
hmm,
creating these legislation, right? And then you got the fake media, perpetuating it. So it's a huge mess what's going on, right?
hmm,
So it needs a major, major overhaul. But these powers to be don't want to give up their power, so that's where the struggle arises. But we can see it clear as day what's going on, right?
yeah, and it's just been hastened so much in the last 2 years, with so many people unemployed and so many businesses disenfranchised for the large oligarch systems,
Yeah,
that I think a lot of Canadians are feeling disenfranchised, and I know many have a loss of hope or a loss of direction, and they're kind of not sure what to do in the next few years, what plans to make, and that's an awful feeling. And I know I'm one of those Canadians that lives in that group now, and it makes it difficult. You don't know how to plan for your future. You don't know whether it's a good idea to save in a bank, because your money and the investment you have will all be gobbled up with inflation. It,
yeah,
it it's very defeating
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah.
demoralizing,
It's okay.
and that's one of the things, though, that it is one of the first steps in communism to demoralize the population, to criminalize normal behavior, and essentially turn the population on itself, and then come back in as the arbiter of peace.
Yeah,
And gosh darn it, we're following down that road.
Big time. So
Yeah.
this comment here I want to touch on. Let's just look through these comments to wrap up. Steve saying people made the government did not make the people. But this is, I would contend that this is a chicken, did the chicken or the egg come first argument, Philip?
Yes.
Because we know the same parties have been in power, right? We know the elections are rigged. The whole election act is favored to those big parties. We got the fake media pushing it, right? So you're dealing with that systemic issue there again. So you can't say that the government represents the people. Sure, there's a group of people that are controlling the country, Philip.
Yes.
We don't have a free and democratic society right now. That's something NCA would like a genuine, true, free and democratic society, right? That's a general expression, but that's out of the charter. But that's something we would like. But you can't. The government is made up of people, but it's both. It's an entity upon itself now, right? So it's a big issue that we're facing.
Absolutely.
So this guy, he seems out of touch to me. People make the rules. The government listen and does. What the hell is he talking about? The governance in this country is completely top down. Any consultation is just like tapping your pencil on the desk. It's just
Yeah.
pretense.
No, the way
They're
that
working for
laws,
special interests. They're working for themselves. Come
the,
on, it's rotten.
our laws basically in the last few years have either been response to a crisis and an emotional response.
And he's defending
Such a,
CSIS. Like this guy must be part of the cabal. He's defending CSIS here. I'm
yeah,
I'm
let's
learning.
let him say what he wants though. It's
I
okay.
know, but
Yeah.
I'm learning people. I'm concerned about the power of CSIS. How they can disrupt any Canadian and censor and do whatever. Probably even kill them, and there wouldn't be recourse because they're operating in the shadows, Philip.
It's possible.
So this is a concern. Where's the public accountability, right?
Yeah.
So they're like kind of. I don't want to. I didn't want to say this, but they're like a form of the Gestapo, right? Let's face it. They're
Well,
working in the shadows and they're making sure people are conforming to the status quo.
that was the role of the Gestapo at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Wasn't it?
So
I mean,
I
it's the
would
same as
argue that they're
the
a form of the Gestapo, right?
yes.
Let's
Well,
face it.
well,
But
or
they're working for the establishment. They're not working for the people,
yeah.
right? So I know they were disrupting some of the protesters this year. Why the hell were they doing that? They were protesting the lockdown. So that's a national security threat, Philip?
Well, that's the interesting dynamic that's been raised quite a bit by many of the alternative media sites is the contrast of one protest will be crushed, while another protest will be applauded and lauded even in the news. And they often try to talk about the BLM protest, but there was one, it was a pro-Palestine protest
Yeah.
a few months ago in Toronto, and that got total national coverage.
Yeah, here, this kind
Yeah.
of speaks what I've been talking about recently.
Hmm.
He's saying learn your rights, but my point to everyone out there, you have very limited rights. You have very limited rights. You have no right to privacy. You have no right to freedom from censorship,
Hmm.
right? On and on. Surveillance. Government can conduct surveillance on you without any restriction on that, Philip.
Yeah. Well, you don't even know
Right,
if it's been done or not, right? That's
right.
the. I'm sure they.
So there's big systemic issues. People need to accept that. The problem is it's been going on for over 100 years,
Hmm.
right? So this is really entrenched in here what we're dealing with. We're at a crisis in this country, Philip, if you break it down logically, right? We need a major overhaul, like 100%. This could be the greatest country in the world, but we're
Oh,
heading down the
absolutely.
wrong path, Philip, without question. They talk about freedom, democracy, rights. Come on. It's all
Hmm.
talk when you
Yes.
break it down.
Yes,
We're basically living in a surveillance police state right now,
absolutely, and even
right?
more, it'll be even more so in the near
And
future.
then you got CSIS operating in the shadows, and they can disrupt anyone. You got the fake media programming everyone to think a certain way,
Hmm.
right? So those are the realities of it. We're anything but a free and democratic society.
Yes.
So that's the truth.
No, it's for the lack of better terms of who was it, Roddy Piper. Like Canadians need to put on the
But
glasses.
I'm looking at this.
Yeah.
Albert seems to be shooting straight. This Kenny guy who's been to Bilderberg twice. Come on.
Well,
They've they've
they've
locked down. They've had severe lockdowns on people. They've they divided society. You're an essential worker. You're a non-essential worker. That's a form of segregation. They're no different than the Trudeau Liberals here.
they've gone after the church harsher than any
They've
other
gone after
province.
the church. They drag preachers in the streets,
Yeah.
setting examples of them. They find people. They imprison people. And this guy says they're shooting straight. They're going after Alberta parks. They're allowing private business in there to take them over. Did you know that?
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, it's a disaster here. This is run by select interests,
Hmm.
right? The people don't matter, right? So that to me was one of the great beauties of what happened over the last year is that anyone with a brain could see that the divide between liberal and conservative is just a facade. There's no difference.
Hmm.
Philip?
Oh, it's true, and
Because you see that in Ford, Kenny, Trudeau. What's the difference,
it's a step
right?
approach. You have one party will take this step, the other party will take this step.
No, but they were all
And
doing the same thing. If anything, Ford and
yes,
Kenny were worse.
well, the next year they just move on, and it goes up to the next rank. So
And why
eventually you
was
get to your
Kenny at
end goal anyway.
Bilderberg? What was Kenny doing at Bilderberg twice? So that's a globalist shadow group, by the way, for anyone who doesn't know. What was he doing there?
Hmm.
Why is this guy the premier of Alberta? Why is the fake media behind him? Right? People need to ask questions.
Well, you have to. It's an interesting rise as well.
Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah.
I brought that up, and Nicole's, if I can use the term awake, but she was bringing it up, Bilderberg, uh, all the stuff, but we don't want to. We don't want to. We
Yeah,
don't
like
want to.
look,
Go
we
ahead.
even have in Ontario. I mean, we've Doug Ford. I mean, he wasn't in
Yeah,
politics before. He was planted in.
yeah.
I
There you
mean,
go. She's right,
yeah.
Nicole. Controlled opposition is everywhere. It's rampant. I believe there's certain political entities out there that are working with CSIS.
Hmm.
I believe. I believe that. I have suspicions that they're kind of gatekeepers trying to protect the status quo, the establishment cabal. That's why they're there, right?
Yes.
This is what we're up against.
Yep.
But we have to really take a close look at what are our real rights and freedoms. Do we really have a democracy, right? We have to address this in order to fix it, Philip. If we're believing we have all this when we don't, right?
Hmm. No, and it's something that can be rebuilt, though. I mean, it's not all to be
Of
torn
course it
down,
is.
but
Of course it is.
that's what their goal of a NCA party would be, is to help to rebuild and reform the Constitution such that the rules and other legislation, basically, so that they apply
Major,
to all
major
Canadians.
overhaul. And look, it has to
And
start with the central bank. Look what the central bank is doing.
yes.
Like, look what's going on with the Federal Reserve. Like, we're not going to get into that today, but it's unbelievable. And right now, the U.S. Economy is on teeters. It's same with the Canadian. It's heavily in debt, both of them. They've been creating so much money, which is inflation. So inflation is starting to run away, and
Hmm.
then we're starting to get less growth. We're heading into and I heard someone about this today, but I like the term. It's called stagflation, a debt-ridden, stagflated society, right? That's a terrible place to be, Philip.
Yes.
Consumer confidence is dropping. There's new numbers out that are showing that, and they should be dropping. People should be very concerned,
Yeah. Well, I mean,
right?
it's hard to say what is the future for the next year if businesses have to remain at a reduced capacity and you have restrictions or potential reductions in those capacities or operations at any time in the future. There's that hasn't been spelled out right now. How can you
Yeah,
make
yeah,
a confidence for hiring? Um, to make a large investment, to plan to build that deck, that new fence, make that large car investment, etc. It's going to make people very insecure. You have a government that's campaigning on the fact that they will remove petroleum powered vehicles by the year 2035. That's what is that now? That's 14 years.
yeah. China's already doing that.
How are we going to get all the cars off the road in 14
Yeah,
years?
yeah,
How
yeah,
will Canadians get around? How will that
yeah.
be achieved?
And who's going to pay for all these new cars?
Will we have cars? Will we be able to afford
Electric
them?
car, electric car,
How will that be powered?
through
What?
batteries.
Yes, that will be powered by what power plants that are going to be built.
Exactly,
You know,
exactly.
so if anyone wants to do the math on the infrastructure, there's a large percentage of the population that will be left unaccounted for in this new future economy. What will happen to them?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Look at here. I just want to get to this comment. You need to gain control of the media. I would contend, no, no, we don't. But we need true independent media that can do its job and inform the people. Right now, we have controlled media, paid media,
Well,
right?
it's not so
But
much that we
NC,
have paid media, though, Stephen. It's that
it
we don't
is.
have the
It's
ability
literally
to have other voices heard
no.
as
But the
well.
government is paying the media.
Yeah, because they're shouldering everyone else out at the bar. That's what it is.
No, but they're
They're using
also
it by
paying them.
legislation.
They're
Yes.
saying, "Oh, great, great, great content. Here's your paycheck."
Yeah.
Right? But NCA doesn't want to do what they're doing. Then we're no different,
Hmm.
right? We want independent media that's really providing important information to the public, right? We don't want a media that's in bed with the establishment, right?
Hmm.
Shut down the counterintelligence. Yeah, but we need to rein that in, right? This CSIS is getting out of control. If they're going after lockdown protesters, and they were, Philip, that's pretty scary stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when the internal police turns on the people,
Yes.
and the government uses the internal police against the people, um, well, the nation is kind of turned against itself, and
Well, that's what's happening
that's the
now,
problem
Philip.
here. Yeah, and I mean that's been
Philip.
going on for more than just now, but it's been
But what's
it's
concerned is it's so vague. Like for them to
mhm.
say, you know, this organization is a threat to Canada. What is Canada? How do they define that? The government, the establishment, right? So
Mhm.
is NCA a threat to the establishment? Because we want to do what's right for the country, and therefore we're a threat, Philip?
Well, some would
You
say
see?
that's true.
You see? So
Yeah.
this is something we got to get under wraps too. But this maritime law, we're all registered as a corporation from the day we're born. Yes, that's true, but it doesn't deny the fact that we have existing laws, Philip, and we're governed under there. I think people have to be very careful with this common law. It can lead to a lot of issues. We're not going to get into it today, but whether you like the laws out there, whether municipal, provincial, federal, we are subject to them, and if you violate them, you can get into big trouble. So we ask people to be very careful. You can't just create your own laws, and but we're not going to get into that fully today, Philip. But that's just a warning to people. Be very careful. Uh, you could get yourself in a lot of trouble. We're not saying these laws need to be changed. Obviously, we need major reform of legislation, and that includes existing laws.
Exactly.
But here, Philip, this is true. Agenda 30, own nothing and be happy, right?
Yeah. And it's rapidly coming that way. Where I work right now, I'm one of the few people that owns a home. Very few my age own a home, and that's if you go. I'm 41 years old. I'm sure 30-year-olds, an even lower percentage of those folks would own a home. And I owned my first home when I was 28 years old, and I put my down payment when I was 25. It just took a while to be built, but that's something that'll be out of even a realm of possibility for so many Canadians now. And it's
What's going to
because,
happen when they increase the interest rates? Right now, they're near zero.
well, that's it. And I mean, so much for the interest rate. Look at the inflationary rate.
Oh,
If,
yes.
if you're not in the market already, no matter how much you save every month, you could earn $100,000 a year, which is be considered a fairly decent income for many. You would not be able to afford a home where I live if you saved every single year and you saved 20 to 30% of your paycheck, put it in a bank account, and thought, well, I'm going to buy a house when I'll get to 20% of the down payment. It would be a lot of years. And, I doubt you'd actually have been able to buy a house if you were saving for the last 10.
Yeah. The fact is, with the inflation rate now, you're losing money on your savings. The inflation rate is close to 5%. It's probably up at 8, 9%.
Mm-hmm.
But they've been playing with the CPI numbers
Yes.
to undervalue them.
Yes.
So if you got your money in savings, you're earning what 1 or 2% interest. Inflation rate is around 8 or 9%. You're losing money. This is affecting seniors across the country, Philip.
Huge. Huge.
But this is
Yeah.
but this reflects of the fiscal and monetary policy by the central bank
Well, if you just take it
that's going
simple,
on.
if you were contributing to a pension plan or contributing to your RRSPs for say the last 30, 40 years, I'll just use my mother as an example. Had she used the same funds, had invested in some sort of stock options, or just bought shares of a house or another house once they got the cumulative funds. So when she retired and had $350,000 approximately in her RRSPs, um, she lost a huge amount of money gradually in taxes. She paid a higher tax rate effective taking that money out today than she would have taken it when she put the money initially in from 1970 and 80, etc., when the rates were slightly lower then. So had she put the same amount of money into a home or some solid asset like gold or etc., she would have been much more further ahead, 3 or 4 times further
Yeah.
ahead. But no, they encourage you to invest in your RRSPs and savings accounts because that's a good sound investment. Well, it's turned out to be a very big lie when
Yeah.
you look at the greater system of finance in this country.
Yeah, especially in inflation when you factor in inflation. But this is a real concern. Um, I think people, we're going to do a thing on the economy. We're going to have to talk about it, what's going on. But I think that would, but next week we're going to talk about manufacturing. I did an intro to it, Philip,
Yes.
but we're going to dive into that and look at the numbers. Look at the number of companies, Canadian companies overseas, how many are here. Look at the relevant legislation, Philip, so we can get a better grasp of what's going on. But I'm not going to rehash what I said today. But the bottom line is, a lot of it is factored by um, the wage rates. Play a big factor in where people manufacture. Obviously, there's Canadian mining here. If you're mining here, whether it's gold, silver, platinum, uranium, you're gonna do the processing here. Ideally, you're gonna mine the stuff, process it, Philip. That makes sense. Forestry, same thing. You're gonna harvest the trees. You're gonna replant them because they're here. But if you're manufacturing a commercial good, you're probably going to want to do it in Taiwan or China, where you're going to pay a fraction of the wages. You're going to have less regulation and all that, Philip.
Hmm.
But my concern that I brought up today is there's people that are pushing 100% Canadian manufacturing, and some of these are fake conservatives, multi-controlled conservatives. I don't
Hmm.
even know what conservative is, right? It has no meaning, right? Because they're both the same. It's a way to divide people, right? Liberal,
Yes.
conservative, left, right. So we don't want to play that game. But anyone who's saying 100% manufacturing in Canada, as I said already, they're either stupid or they're manipulating you, hoping that you buy into that sentiment,
Hmm.
Philip. But
Absolutely.
but the reality of 100% manufacturing, that's China, right?
Yes. They
They
probably
have
could be
very they
100%.
have
Yeah.
yeah, I bet you China is textbook example of that. Think about it. They have very low wages, minimum regulations, right?
Hmm.
They have basically a communist one party system, right? Controlling everything within that,
Yes.
right? They have 100% manufacturing. Okay. So if Canada is going to go there, maybe the establishment wants to take us there. They would have to overpopulate the country, and they're moving towards that right now. They would push our wages down to maybe $2, $1. They would cut the regulations, right? Have a top down central government controlling everything, just like China.
Just
Then they,
yes, and not even to think about the shock years where the lack of manufacturing capability was felt, where we said, okay, everything is now going to be produced in Canada. That's all of the baseball gloves that you buy, all of the packaging for your containers of milk, all of the packages for your cereal, all of the clothes that you make. Well, it would be great maybe in the long term once we're able to establish all of the connections and the logistics. But how will you get supplies in the first 5 years of that? It's actions like this that led to the starvation of millions in other nations.
yeah, but the
These
whole,
words are crazy.
I
Yeah.
know. Another thing doesn't make sense. We got Canadian mining companies operating all over the world, right? And now we're going to say we're only going to accept Canadian manufacturing. It doesn't make sense, right? So, right?
Hmm.
So we can operate in foreign jurisdictions, but we want everything here, right? You can't have your cake and eat it too, right? Unless you're like China, where you have minimal wages, right? Minimal regulation, right?
Yeah. But I think
And
we're also,
companies,
though, I mean, politicians now live in the 5 minute soundbite. So it's a bit of political brouhaha. Oh, we'll make it all in Canada. I mean, I sure hope they wouldn't put that to pen and actual
yeah. But
legislation.
we're
But
gonna
yeah,
we're gonna dive into that next week. I think it's manipulation, but I concede your point. But maybe in the long term, maybe that's where they want to take the country. It's possible, right?
hmm,
So we got to look at that. We can't rule that out. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. Olive is she gets it. Elite. I don't even want to use the word elite because that's kind of
hmm,
like saying they're better.
yes,
Call them cabal, Olive. Like who the hell are these people? If you met them, you would probably cringe, right? Philip
hmm,
are
yeah.
making us a third world country, starting with housing. Yeah, of course, that's part of UN Agenda 2030, and uh, it, it's bringing in all these things, all the mass migration in Philip, which is putting pressure uh, it, on everyone. Yes, cabal, she gets it there. Yeah, we
Yes.
just got to be careful of the terminology.
Hmm.
Um, I don't view these people as elites. They're arrogant tyrants, right? And they're dictating to the people. They don't believe anything they're saying. It's all a pretense. The rights, freedoms, democracy, as we already discussed. But start with the housing, like you brought up, Philip. Look,
Yes.
the housing costs. And I find this is funny here that she would bring that up because look at Vancouver, eh? These provincial and cabal in uh, BC, the federal government, they let all these Chinese migrants come and they wanted their money. And now there's a public backlash of what's going on, right? Because they're buying up homes and it's pushing housing prices, right? But
Oh,
they let it, no, but they let it happen,
well, this is the drive, and this is the
you know?
fear that many have is
No, but they,
but Stephen, this is the thing is by having so many people lacking property and opportunity, you now will have a large group of the population that will need it. once there's a new economic wave where it says, okay, we will now harvest our resources again, we'll now provide it to the foreign nation, we'll reestablish the mercantile system like the 17th century. Instead of England being the recipient, it would be now, I would say, Asian nations. I think of one. And they would now be the recipient of our water, our timber, our, cotton, and all these other products that would be made in North America. And we could be the subservient workers like we used to be and reestablish that system where we are the exporters and they can bring their luxury goods to us that we'll buy at a high exorbitant cost, and we live in our substandard lifestyle as would be deemed necessary of that new model. That's my fear of what could happen
Yeah.
and what's
Yeah.
going to happen if there's not a change in the
Yeah.
political sphere.
Yeah.
And that's where there'll be a massive outcry to say, well, the nation must do something to house all of these people now that have no housing. And there we go into a national housing strategy that literally allows for the setup of communal farms, communal
Yeah.
operations, towns, etc. And it sounds a bit out there, but my gosh, if the last 2 years have been eye-opening of what could be previously known as crazy town and ideas and thoughts of what truly has happened, really all of these possibilities are open now.
Of course they are. And a
And
lot of them aren't possibilities. They're actually realities. The nanotechnology, the lab food, obviously the 5G and the surveillance and all that. That's coming, and the AI, the transhumanism. That's not possibility. That is reality. It's becoming more reality. But look at Debbie. We see what is coming, but
mhm.
I don't think she reflects a small minority. Philip, I would contend that the majority of the people are programmed. They have no idea of what's going on, and they're focused on their day to day lives, trying to make a living, and um, you know.
Yeah.
So I question I question that, and what do we do about it? Philip and I have been talking about that the whole time. We talked about all this legislation, the Constitution we need to deal with. Um, the problem is that we've had the same people in power for so long
Yeah,
that it's
and
so entrenched, Debbie, that there's so much reform. Like we almost have to start over in this country, Philip. It's so far gone.
well,
Um,
we have to get back to the fact that we're a nation that exists in a world with 7 billion people. There is a scarce amount of resources in this world. We are having a government that's misdirecting the people, they're impoverishing the people, and they're weakening us as a nation and our ability to be able to respond to any other group that could potentially take our resources.
yeah, but
So
remember,
yes,
it, it,
but
it's beyond the government. There's establishment cabal.
exactly. And so what we are being influenced by other nations that are essentially taking the advantage and righthood of our children and our future, our families, and our ability to succeed and have a good quality of life like our grandparents did, our parents did, and often many of us did as children. This is going to be gone. It will not return
Yeah, yeah, Debbie.
unless,
About
as a group of people, we stand and try to change that. And we have to know that on the political sphere and the grand scheme of the entire world, Canada has probably the largest freshwater resources in the world. It's often said that's a resource. Every other nation will want our water eventually because they will need it. We have the third largest reserves of oil in the world. Eventually, other nations will want our oil. And there's some of the thoughts that the conservation and environmental movements are there to essentially do a soft inaction to restrict our production of oil. Those are soft acts of war. And this is a reality, and we have to be aware of this. And the fact that we're not producing oil and making products and making that wages by having employees work in those industries so that they can feed their children and produce products and good qualities of life for themselves, their families, and others. We're losing out on everything. There
yeah, to
will be
some
no
degree.
future, you know?
But but Philip, understand that we have
Yes.
companies operating, like the mining industry, which I'm quite informed on.
Yes.
We have them operating in all hemispheres around of the world, in the
Oh,
Americas,
exactly.
Central Americas, Africa. But they're creating local jobs there. They
Oh,
have
absolutely.
some Canadian jobs. Understand we have foreign investment in the country, right?
Yes.
So, we're going to have to take a close look at that.
But there has
But
to be some
but you
control
can't have
without
your
the
cake
buying
and
up.
eat it
Yeah.
too. The
Yeah.
Canadian mining industry is a good example. Like they're all over the world. You could argue if you're from, let's say you're from the Congo, you could say, well, they're exploiting our resources, right?
Oh no, I'm not saying they're exploiting the
No, but
resources
there's
to an extent.
companies there. But then you say there's foreign companies here
No, but what I'm
exploiting
saying
our
is
resources.
we won't be benefiting from it. Is what I'm telling you. Is once these groups own the land to an extent, and once they have the massive control of our government, their payments for taxes won't be made. The wages for their employees can be lower, or if the inflation continues and wage levels
Yeah,
stay the same,
yeah,
and then they can come in and basically then set up that mine that is cheap as the dickens, just like previously persons from our nations benefited from in other nations. It's a shift.
yeah,
And, rather than trying to push towards an equalization opportunity, we're going the other way where we will now be the disadvantaged nation and others will rise. I don't believe that they will be an equalized rise in possibly those other nations, but it's a total change and shift of how um, everything has worked for so many years. And
yeah. So we're going to
yeah,
get into this next week, Philip. We're going to look into manufacturing. We're going to provide some pretty interesting information. But again, we have to start from the legislation, look at the reality on the ground, and see what's possible.
mhm,
But I think people should be very scared if you hear one of these cabal politicians talking about 100% Canadian manufacturing. You should be very scared. You should send that guy to a loony bin, or he's a lying snake. He's just trying to manipulate people. Philip,
I agree.
right? So this guy, look, he's strangling us. They're strangling us into submission. So this is on so many fronts, because you're dealing not with the government; it's beyond the government. You're dealing with establishment. They have systemic control over the people,
Mhm.
right? That's what we're dealing with. We're living in a soft tyranny,
Yes.
right? So that's the truth of it, and we're going to have to address that. We did talk about this at the beginning, looking at reforming legislation, um, uh, getting rid of legislation, amending legislation that's been it's just rotten over the years, the decades of the same entities amending and writing this legislation, right,
Yes.
Philip?
Yeah. It's
You're
just really setting the
dealing with
bar. Yeah.
a rotten constitution that has so many holes in it, like it's unbelievable, right? So there's a lot of work that needs to be done. So, but we will continue this next week. I'm looking forward to the manufacturing. Send me information, Philip, if you get it.
Okay.
We'll
Uh,
do some research. People listening out there, if you come across something interesting on manufacturing, you want us to share, send it to us an email so we
please.
can share it during the dialogue next week. On that, you
Yes.
can send it to us at info@nationalcitizensalliance.ca. But
Yes.
that's another topic. After that, we're going to have to go into the economy again, Philip. What's going on? It's
Yes.
getting quite serious. I know I'm looking at 0% here. I wonder what that means, 0%. What do you think he's referring to with that name?
0%.
Because normally you say the 1%.
Well, I mean, the 1%, it would be a much smaller group that would be the true beneficiary of um, much of this
Yeah.
legislative effects. I mean,
They're
it's
saying booming prices, so that's the inflation across the board. But homes sell over asking in 2 days nuts. Yeah, the housing market's out of control. These
yes,
central banks are manipulating, propping up. There's financial bubbles everywhere. We're not going to get into it today.
Yeah.
But this is all, there's going to be a major correction coming. We don't
Yes.
know when. It could be a year, 2, 3 years, but it's coming. We're not going to tell you how to invest. Consider precious metals. That's all I would say, because
Yeah.
they're a safe haven, defensive play.
Some of us
Uh,
invested in
and
brass.
worried about your currency in the bank.
Yeah.
Is it going to get devalued?
Well, it's tough.
Right?
Yes. If
Look
we,
at Lebanon. What's happened to their currency? It's
oh,
worth it's gone down like 90%
oh, the
in value.
participation of Lebanon. That's,
Yeah, it's
yeah,
terrible.
yeah. I mean, yeah, I mean, well, ever since that, I don't know, that explosion or strike or whatever happened there in the spring, that's been a complete downfall there in
Well,
Lebanon,
it's the
from my
central
understanding.
bank.
Yeah.
They've been creating so much money that they've completely it's out of control. They've caused this extreme inflation,
Hmm.
like well over 100%.
Wow.
It's devalued the currency, right? It's out of control, and that's what they're doing here with the central bank. And I find it ironic. I'm not going to get into this, but Federal Chairman Powell of the Federal Reserve was talking last week. Oh, we're going to stay the course, keep interest rates low. We don't, we're going to live with the inflation because they're cornered, right? Because they got so much debt. There's so
Yeah.
many financial bubbles. They can't increase the interest rates. So inflation's going to run hot. Eventually, they're going to pull the plug on it. A lot of people are going to be hurt, but that could bring in the reset, the financial reset.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see what happens there. But it's the same here in Canada. The debt's out of control. It's
Yes.
causing it is inflation, Philip. That's the main driver of inflation is money supply.
Well, I mean, I think the next move would be to go to a negative interest rate.
They're
I'm not
already there in Europe. They're already
exactly,
there. But
and
that's only the thing is people need to realize that's only making it worse. That's
yes,
only expanding the bubbles.
yeah. Well, all it does
So a
actually
lot
is
of
harvest
people
your
don't.
savings. It harvests your
So
savings. Is what a negative interest
So
rate
these
does.
central banks are pretending
Yes.
protecting these big corporations and etc. Right? But they're out of control, uh, and they're going to let this thing crash at one time, and then they're going to pretend it wasn't their fault,
Yeah, it was
right?
COVID-19.
But this could lead to one of the most severe corrections we've ever seen, Philip. So I want people to be cautious, but we're gonna have to get into that. I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thanks for your comments. Send us anything on the manufacturing,
Yes.
any videos you want us to share. If you come across a government document or something we need to address, we will do that next week.
Or an insider
Probably
expert.
yes,
Someone that would be inside the industry that could like to share a story or information. That would be really most valuable. Yeah.
yeah. Send us that, and we'll share that. We want to wish everyone a great long weekend. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah.